Okay, hello again. My name is Steve Gammer, and I'm just going to welcome everybody here to our Land Assembly Forum, Part 2. And I'm just going to invite our guests if they would like to turn on their videos. I think we've all arrived. And if you have your coffee or tea like me, we might be doing just a little bit to enjoy your morning and start the day. Hopefully not needing to keep you awake, but having some really stimulating discussions here. So I'll just introduce myself again. My name is Steve Gammer. I am a former president of CCIM Western Canada chapter and director of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. I've been in real estate, doing commercial real estate for about 19 years now. And today we have an excellent panel with us. We have Brandon Harding, who is a realtor at NAI Commercial, and he has experience doing land assemblies. He's transacted over $1 billion in real estate. We also have Jeff Matthews. Jeff is an acquisitions manager at Townline Group of Companies, and he'll have some excellent things for us to say to hear as well. Finally, we have Andrew Merrill from the city of Coquitlam, and he's an urban planning design professional, and he's going to have a lot of things for us to learn as well from the city's perspective. So I want to welcome each of them. The other thing that I want to do is just make sure that each of you, as the participants and the audience, know that you can type your questions in the Q&A section. So that is going to be where you're going to interact with us, and we're going to be able to see your questions and be able to give answers to the panelists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some of those questions and get help from the staff that's here with us. So we have Tammy Dunn. If Tammy, if you have a screen that you can say hello, as well as Cheryl Funston, both from the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver. So if you guys want to say hello and introduce yourselves there. Okay, yep, I can see Tammy now. That's great. Thank you very much, Tammy. And Cheryl, thank you. So those are the people that are behind the scenes that are going to be helping keep this thing moving right along and getting your questions to us. So if you, let's just do a quick question right now. I'm just going to ask everybody, if you just really want to type into the question and answer section, name the city where you live and where you're watching from right now. Okay, so we've got Vancouver, Burnaby, lots from North Van, Richmond, great. Tsawwassen, North Van, excellent, thank you. Okay, that's great. Thank you ever so much for participating. It looks like it's all working nice. Not sure how many people we have, but it looks like we have several hundred that are going to be here with us today. Oh, somebody's in Cloverdale. That's my hometown. So thank you to coming out here. So we've got the rodeo coming up. I'm not sure if we have the rodeo, but we used to have the rodeo before COVID. But I'm going to start off by welcoming Brandon Harding. Brandon is a published writer and a community leader in land and changing land use. He's a second generation realtor and has been on a team that has transacted over $3 billion in land sales. So that's a lot. So he's going to have insights in a lot of different capacities of what it takes to get land assembled and to market, and he knows how to get that funnel and bring it forward. So what I'm going to do is just ask Brandon just to talk a little bit about himself, and then give us some information as to what you are going to be able to work in your building perspective, actually from a realtor. So Brandon, thank you, and welcome to you.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. And thanks for having me on. Thanks to the Real Estate Board. So yeah, we've got a great group of panelists. Jeff actually works for Strand now. He's moved on from Townline. But yeah, he had a good stint at Townline before that. Yeah, as Stephen mentioned, second generation realtor. I've been doing it for the better part of a decade with NAI Commercial. I'm the vice president there. and only been transacting land. So been doing it for quite a while. Sort of seen a lot of progression through land assembly over the years. It's definitely become a lot more mainstream than when I started almost 10 years ago. And through that, yeah, we've seen a lot of changes and a lot of improvements, I'd like to say, through the process. So basically, I'll touch on kind of some of those improvements that we've seen and we've implemented into our approach. That's been really helpful, not only for us, for homeowners, but also for developers and buyers as well. So it's really been making the whole land assembly more streamlined and more successful as well. So a lot less, it's a lot more rare for us now to have these assemblies not come together. So I'll just get started then, Stephen. And yeah, okay, great. So one of the most important things that, through my experience, that we've learned in the beginning, early in my career, this is something I would say was the biggest mistake, was kind of rushing through this or not maybe realizing the importance of it. And that is pre-assembly. So it used to be you kind of piece together a lot, these sites, and you'd put together as many as you could, maybe, or even a couple of them. And there was always a rush or urgency to get to market and start trying to get offers. And the classic marketing approach is just like a lot of potential additions. So when developers, or when we're marketing these sites or see these other sites that have potential additions throughout the assembly versus ours, which typically are fully assembled, we love to see other brokers bringing those potential addition kind of partially assembled sites to market. And when we see those, we just know it's just helping sell our sites, because we take that extra moment and take that extra time to make sure that it's fully assembled. And some of the other benefits to that as well is also I think what sometimes we forget to keep in mind is this is the biggest decision a homeowner is going to make. So they're not going to make this decision lightly, but they're also going to want to make sure that their input and they are in control of the decision making all the way through. So what happens is, during this process early on, is, okay, if you haven't necessarily included them or made them feel comfortable with proceeding with you, and then later on you do get that offer or those offers and you present it to them, you're essentially trying to like crowbar them into a deal, and they haven't had that input and they haven't been able to make those decisions for themselves. And that's where these deals kind of fall apart. And a lot of times it's very frustrating, because you want to get this deal put together, you're super excited about it, you've got maybe this great offer, and you have a couple holdouts, but the reality is they're not necessarily holdouts. They just weren't involved enough for the whole process, and they didn't have enough information. And what can even be worse is if they're not included and you're not the one providing that information, they might be basically going and talking to other sources that aren't going to necessarily be able to have that accurate information. So if you have, if you have like an assembly of 5 homes, and you've got 2 of them that are potential additions, 3 have listed with you, and you've got that offer, that whole time you've been going through and maybe not providing those 2 homes as much information as they should be getting. They're sourcing that information from other places, and that can definitely be working against you, because that could be bad information. So that's kind of some of the major benefits that we see of pre-assembling, and that's really important aspect of the process. It should never be rushed. I think it's where the most time gets spent, obviously, and you can never spend enough time there to really try and make sure you have everyone in the fold before you do go to market and start trying to get these offers. And the nice thing too is, another aspect we'll talk about too that kind of ties into pre-assembling is working on off-market deals versus having those pre-assembled sites. So when you have an off-market deal and you're bringing a developer to the table, it's not going to lead typically to the best offers, because developers aren't going to be as interested or as bullish as a site that's off market, versus, again, taking that time to really connect with the owners, work through their objections and their obstacles of why they didn't want to list it, market it properly, create that competition, and make sure that it's coming in onto market and is fully exposed to all developers. So this will also lead to a much better outcome for everyone. And we just see still so many brokers, especially earlier on in their career, trying to do these off-market deals. And a lot of times it's just, and from our experience, it's been so, in the past, we've tried some off-market deals, and it's very frustrating because you don't actually have that level of commitment from owners where they're going to proceed potentially when that offer comes, and things, you can waste a lot of time on those. So we made the executive decision quite a while ago that we don't work on any off-market deals. Basically, if an ownership group is not willing to list with us, then we just won't work on it. I will say that's very generous. We'd love to work with you, but in that situation, it's just not going to work for us. So that's another, I think, that important part of this process is, you can spend a lot of time on these deals and they just go nowhere. So you want to really focus your efforts on the homeowners that are willing to list or willing to work with you in that capacity, go to market. And when you do get those offers, it's going to be just a better offer and a better outcome for everybody. Yeah, so once you do get your assembly pre-assembled, then you have those owners ready to go, and you've put in that legwork, you've worked through their objections and anything that they feel comfortable, so they've listed with you. The next logical step is you want to make sure that you speak to the city. And a lot of times this step also gets skipped or maybe rushed through. And it can lead to really the whole site just not working out or being viable because, for example, there was a site in Coquitlam recently, and we spoke with the realtor because there's a road that has to go through it, and they didn't have one of the properties that was part of that road. But their assumption was, the realtor's assumption was, because they hadn't spoken with the city, that the city wouldn't hold up a development based on one property not wanting to be included that was going to potentially be a future road. And the road couldn't get built without that property. So basically, the city has really strong guidelines around those examples where they're not going to allow a developer to proceed with the lots beside a road, and then that road can't get built because it can't feasibly get done on one property. So speaking with the city, also very important through this process. And you want to make sure that you're asking them anything that they can foresee with the site, or anything that they see will have an impact, like could be potentially road dedications, or if there's a creek involved, or if there's anything that new roads, or even sometimes we've seen like a roundabout that needs to be put in. There's just so many different things, orphaning properties, making sure that the city's going to support that application. So the first step is get pre-assembled, make sure that you have all the homeowners on board, try and not have any potential additions, take that extra time, even have the neighbors talk to them, make sure that you got your fully assembled site ready to go, ready to hit the market, speak to the city, make sure that there's no complications, or that you know what is going to impact the site, what is going to be affecting it going down in the future, and what challenges and obstacles developers might face when they're going and talking with the city and trying to put together their development plans.
Brandon, I'm just going to jump in for a second, if you're okay, and ask you one question that I thought that came in that that might be helpful. What's the difference between a partially assembled project and a fully assembled project?
Yeah, great question. So partially assembled is, say you have those 5 lots and say 3 of them have listed with you, but 2 of them might not be ready to list at that time. So you decide, okay, I'm going to go to market and try and get offers anyways. So now what you've got is you've got those 2 kind of holes in your assembly. And what we see a lot of times is people, brokers market it as potential additions. So maybe they had a brief discussion with those owners, and the owner said, you know what, I'd be open to an offer, but I'm not going to list with you. So you've had that kind of very brief discussion with them, so you can say, okay, well, they said they're open to an offer, so I'm going to put them in my marketing material as a potential addition, and now I've got a potential 5-lot assembly. But what inevitably happens when you bring that offer in is there was a reason they didn't list. They had a whole bunch of objections and challenges that you weren't aware of yet, or you haven't worked through, which is why they didn't want to list with you. So when you bring that offer to them, they now have those same challenges and objections. And a lot of times they become holdouts, not because they're greedy and want a bunch more money, even though that is sometimes the case. A lot of times it's, you just got to kind of work with, if they had that initial, if you had have gone down and maybe spent more time sitting down with them, prepping them, providing them more information on the market, on timelines, understanding what their timelines are. Maybe they have kids in school and they're worried about that, or they're just worried about where, obviously everyone's worried about where they're going to go and finding a new home. And if you can just kind of share information about that, it really helps. And a lot of times they would actually have initially come on board, and that you would have been able to bring them on board. And then the difference is when you have, okay, you spent that extra time getting them pre-assembled, so you have the 5 lots, everyone's listed with you instead of only 3 of them. Now, when you go to developers, there's a lot less uncertainty there. So developers are looking at this fully assembled site, and they know that, okay, if I submit an offer on this site, I have a strong chance of getting it. Versus if you only have 3 of them listed instead of all 5, and they see those potential additions, their first thought is, why didn't they list? What did they want? Maybe they want more money, but maybe there's other reasons. So if they submit that offer, there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether it's going to go anywhere. So they got to commit time and resources to doing their preliminary due diligence. And they might not want to spend as much time maybe really working through the numbers and figuring out where they can pay a little bit more in the cases where there's too much uncertainty with the site, too much risk, and they'd rather submit an offer on a fully assembled site and maybe pay a little bit more because they've had a chance to work through their numbers.
Okay. And in terms of your job, I think is really the job of herding cats, in trying to pull people together, going in the same direction. Do you find that that it's the getting people on the same page? What timeline are we looking at when you're starting to talk to somebody? Do they approach you, or do you approach them? Is it you've seen something in the news that the city is going to be rezoning property and you go in there, or do you have little birds that whisper in your ear and say you need to go talk to this person, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, real estate's just about creating a big network, right? So there's no one method there. Basically, we approach a lot of owners. We send out a lot of marketing material. A lot of owners approach us just from referrals and working in this industry for such a long time. So yeah, basically we follow official community plans, right, and go through, and then that's our area, and we just sort of pick one or two at a time. Team's not big enough to kind of take on more than that, so we sort of focus on a very small puddle, is what I like to call it typically. So, we want to be a big fish in a little puddle, and that's kind of our approach. But it's always a mix. There's just connecting with people. It takes everything. It takes going into their house, door knocking, marketing material, calling, referrals, getting them to call, having them call you, talking to their neighbors, and having them talk to their neighbors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I don't want to cut you off, but I want to make sure that we give enough time to Jeff and Andrew as well. Just to let everybody know, if there is questions that you do have right now for Brandon, we are going to be coming back at the end. We're going to have questions for the whole panel. I'm going to try and answer or ask a few as we go along, and then get to everybody else. But I want to get to Jeff. And Jeff is correctly is no longer at acquisitions at Townline, but at Strand.
Correct.
But I'm pretty sure that that you went to Westminster and that you got your BA at McGill.
Correct. Yeah. There's
Okay, good.
The full educational history that you have there. But yeah, my current role is here at Strand, and I'll give you a quick background on Strand just to kind of frame the discussion going forward from a developer's perspective. Obviously, there's a range of developers pursuing various opportunities across the Lower Mainland. Strand was it's a 30-plus-year-old company. It was branded about 6 years ago. We now have 16 developments at various stages of planning and approvals through construction. We have about 1,200 condos, 168 townhomes, and over 1,700 rental units at various stages of development. So relatively scaled multifamily developer with also some coverage of other asset classes, being industrial and office in Vancouver specifically. So I'm going to preface kind of some more specific notes with kind of history of kind of just coming from a developer's perspective, how we used to pursue assemblies versus how we're doing it today. I think there may still be some development groups who will try and go directly to the homeowners, knocking door to door, but that is very rare these days. And certainly we rely on the realtor community to bring assemblies to us. We understand the work that goes into putting the assemblies together, as Brandon has just kind of explained, and we do value that. So while we are looking at multiple assemblies at any given time, whether they're in Coquitlam or Vancouver or otherwise, there are some important things to look for, or kind of high level points that we're evaluating when we see an assembly opportunity. The first one that hopefully isn't being glazed over is a community plan or zoning in place that will support development of the single family lots. Is there increased density that will unlock the development potential of the homes? Often you'll see the value of the single family house competing with the redevelopment value. So unless there's a significant increase in density or a very desirable townhouse location, the size of lot, etc., how recently the house was built. So there's this comparison that you as a realtor kind of need to look at in terms of what is obviously the home worth today versus what could it be worth as a redevelopment property. And there's a number of things that kind of go into that. Once it's been determined there is a redevelopment play, things we're looking for in terms of scale, and this is extending on Brandon's point on pre-assembling, we're looking for typically about an acre of land. That would be Strand's benchmark. There are groups that will do less than that, but typically it's 3 to 5 larger single family lots as a minimum. And then the more scale, the better generally. If you can continue to assemble, you generally do that. From a dimension standpoint, this can vary significantly. It's hard to get into this minutia here, but depths off of a street, kind of 120 to 150 feet of depth off of a municipal road. And then as long as you're above that kind of threshold, you have a viable assembly, so to speak. And then finally, the net developable area, Brandon touched on this with respect to roads or environmental dedications. If you're next to a creek, you need to at least be aware of how could the development, how could the amount of area on the lot be constrained by other factors, looking at the property itself. So those are some high level things that we're looking at when we see kind of an initial snapshot of an assembly. And then once we kind of see the scale, dimension, location that we like, there's a conversation with the broker or realtor who's marketing the assembly. And I'll just kind of run through some preliminary questions to help inform you or help you anticipate kind of what kind of questions will be coming. The first is, do you have listing agreements in place? So again, Brandon emphasized the importance of ideally having these listing agreements with all owners in the assembly. It's not essential. Often you'll have groups that don't want to list, but it is, I would say it is a deterrent. While it's not a hard no, it will depend on kind of what conversations have occurred with that owner. Why don't they want to list? And then often a developer or buyer will try and approach that owner prior to writing contracts on the other lots to ensure that there is motivation there and that they're not going to run into a dead end after negotiating with the other owners. So that pre-assembling point comes up again in terms of whether the listing agreements are in place. There will also be instances where you may have homes represented by different realtors. That's okay too. So long as everyone is represented and motivated to sell, we'll work with multiple realtors within an assembly as a potential outcome. And then in terms of the off-market component of this, will we kind of work with a realtor to pursue assemblies off-market? That is another avenue that we've taken in the past, whereby we'll kind of identify a block and team up with someone in the area who we know is active and has ideally some relation or connection with the owners, and kind of write unsolicited offers, so to speak. But ideally, the intent here, and I think the goal of this kind of webinar, is to understand how to put the assembly together and attain the listing, which is the ultimate goal on both sides. Next question would be, have the homes been under contract in the past? Has anyone else tied up this assembly and dropped it? Have the owners gone through a negotiation previously? Sometimes this can be a negative if there's deal fatigue and they don't want to, get their hopes up that they have a sale and then it doesn't come through. They may, they may not want to go through that emotional ride again. However, it can also work in your favor as an agent and a potential purchaser if there's indeed more motivation coming out of the back end of a contract that's fallen through. So you just have to read your vendor, your sellers, and also provide some context to any potential purchaser. The next question would be, is there going to be a bid date, or are you open for offers, or are you going to wait and market the site for a certain amount of time before you will accept offers. Typically, once you have kind of an assembly for a multifamily or commercial development, you have some options in terms of how you take it to the market. If the market's strong, you can set a bid date and you might get multiple offers on a given date. But typically the assemblies are run more on a case-by-case basis, whereby the realtor or broker putting it together will identify select groups that they believe are best suited for the project, whether it's multifamily, office, or otherwise. I think the majority of assemblies we're talking about here will be multifamily. So you're trying to identify a buyer that you have confidence will complete at the end of a due diligence period. Price expectations is always important. Trying to keep all the owners the same. This is probably one of the biggest challenges, is trying to get homeowners to align on what their home is worth. And the important explanation is the value is no longer in the home, it's really in the land and the amount of land that each of them own. How big are their lots? How recently their house was built, the renovations they did last year. You have to be sensitive to those things, but ultimately at the end of the day, there's going to be a redevelopment. So educating them on that is important, and trying to get them to align on price. As soon as you have one neighbor at a higher price and they start talking, you'll lose control of the group, and the pricing moves upwards.
So do you basically just use a dollar per square foot and say, this is how much dirt is worth this on the price per buildable, and that's it?
Yeah, and the simplest way for a homeowner to understand it is on a per square foot of their lot area is the best way to probably explain it to them. Everyone is getting this much per square foot of dirt or this much per square foot of land, and then explaining how that relates to the development would be another way to explain it on a per buildable square foot of what is eventually going to get built there. But either way, it's just trying to provide a level playing field, and that generally leads to the highest degree of success in terms of completion through the process.
Can I ask you another question about what actually causes a developer to walk away and just say that, like, something that you've been working on, and say, you know what, this one, it's not worth the effort, even though you've sunk time into it? What is something that causes you to actually say, this is no longer viable for us? Is it market conditions, or is it the sellers, or the assembly? How does that work?
Yeah, there could be any number of factors in terms of having to drop a deal. I think just to extend on the price conversation, even before we have it under contract, we could have one or two homes under contract and we're working on the remaining three. And if one guy's asking for more money and then that value is shared with his neighbors, and then you have the other two that are contracted usually at a lower number, they're now unhappy. You will not be able to extend them if you need to. And you can see how the price expectations, everyone will piggyback on their neighbor, whoever the highest price is. And so if the expectations go up on more than one home, we'll walk away. It simply gets too expensive. We can't pay that much, and the expectations have shifted. If my neighbor's getting that much, I expect that much as well. So that's the initial kind of challenge through assembly, and then obviously through a due diligence period, which I'll get to as well here. There's a number of factors that could lead us to walk away later, but important things to consider. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. And then the last question is how are we going to present offers? Typically, we're presenting individual kind of standard form MLS contracts to each owner, but in some cases, the realtor broker will accept a letter of intent on behalf of all the owners and then work the allocation themselves. We'd prefer to go direct. We've almost eliminated that LOI offer where you're providing kind of a holistic price for the block and then it gets allocated. And this is it again, where it can get allocated a little differently.
When you do an LOI, is it non-binding or binding?
It's non-binding.
Yeah.
So it's just really, and that's where the challenge exists, right? You're really relying on the broker or realtor to help guide the owners within that price. You need to believe they have a very high level of control over the group if you're going to proceed that way. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. I will just note it as an option that we've seen in the past. Ideally, you're getting people on the same form of MLS contract at the same price at the same time. And timing is the ultimate challenge when you're negotiating with multiple groups.
For people that may be new realtors, do you want to just like briefly tell us what an LOI is and how it works?
Yeah, sure. Good question. While I wouldn't, again, not recommending this, but a letter of intent is effectively a 3-page non-binding agreement that will outline high-level terms, which is a good segue. I'll kind of speak to these. Actually, it may be a good, well, I'll wait. I'll explain the LOI. So effectively, it will outline these high-level terms: price, the amount of due diligence or conditional, how much conditional time do we have in a contract, what is the closing date or what is the closing period, and then are there any other terms in the deal that may be negotiated, whether they want to take certain things with them when they leave. And
so it's the who, what, and when, so far as money and times, and so it's very, very brief, is what you're saying.
Yes, very brief, and it just puts it in front of them so that they can respond. It's a faster way. It can be a faster way to negotiate back and forth, and effectively, you're just trying to agree on price before you're getting into full contracts, which right. is more administration when you're dealing with multiple groups.
Right.
But yeah, again, I would recommend setting those expectations so you can skip the LOI process and moving straight to your MLS form contracts.
Okay.
And finally, I'm taking too long for Andrew, but deal terms, price expectations, obviously in line with market and valuing deposits. We typically won't put a deposit up until we're firm. The due diligence period is an important one. I don't know if Brandon touched on it, but typically we need 120 to 100. What do we need? It really depends on the site, but to run a process with the city that Andrew will probably touch on, we need to have some conversations, ensure we're going to be able to develop what we intend to. Call it 120 days as kind of a midpoint. We've had due diligence periods that will be extended 180 longer. If it's a simple site, it could be as short as 90, but 30 to 60 is very rare in an assembly condition or on an assembled site. It's possible if the buyer has a very high degree of confidence or they've done a site nearby, but it's very rare. So that's an important thing to set your buyers up for, is you're going to have to provide some conditional time to determine if the development is feasible, and then closing as well. We see a range, but typically these homeowners need to find a new place to live. Often they've lived in the home for many years. So there's often a mutual benefit to extending a closing period once we're firm and they know they're going to get, they know there's a closing date that's been set. We can often push that out 6 to 12 months so that they can prepare for the move that they have made the decision to effectively move on from their existing home.
And in terms of dates, like you have completion, you have possession, you have when the money transfers. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit? Because I know that sometimes you can have your completion at one date and your possession is actually extended out quite a bit, or in terms of doing due diligence, if there's rezoning that's involved, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Ultimately, yeah, the due diligence is usually a free period upfront. The conditional period or due diligence, the contracts are signed, call it 120 days, where the developer will go away and prove out the feasibility of the site. At the end of that conditional period, 120 days, a firm deposit will be paid. It's typically about 5% of the value on a development site. That is now firm. It's typically held in trust until the closing date. So you're 120 days from when you sign the contract, you're now firm. And then the closing, as mentioned, could be out as, call it 6 months. At 6 months, you'll have your closing date, at which point some homeowners will be prepared to move and leave, and they're moving into their new home that they've secured in that 6 month or 12-month period, whatever the closing period is. They've closed. However, you're right, Stephen, there is often a leaseback period beyond the closing date so that the homeowner is able to hold the money and then go buy another home, right? They need that money in their account to be able to go shopping or looking for another house.
Right.
So that leaseback period again can be negotiated in the MLS contract so that the developer doesn't get possession for another 4 to 6 to 12 months. We've done 12-month leasebacks. We'll often try and charge a nominal rent for that leaseback period. And it works for both parties in terms of keeping the houses occupied through the rezoning and development approvals, and also provides the homeowner with some flexibility in terms of when they actually have to move.
I don't want to cut off.
That's it. That's all I had to say, and
okay.
I got through it as quickly as I could. But it's funny, once you're given a platform, you tend to ramble on. So happy to hear from Andrew now.
Yeah. So Andrew, I'll jump to you as quickly as I can. Andrew Merrill is he's an urban planning and design professional. He works at the city of Coquitlam, and I won't go into his educational background as well. But I'll say that sometimes on the developer side, Andrew's the bad guy, because he's the guy that you have to struggle with in order to get your vision, and the city is trying to say, here's where we want to go. They've got the politicians, they've got the planners, you've got the city, you've got the people that are in the community, and so he has Brendan has his version of herding cats, and then Andrew has his version of herding cats. So I'll give it to you, and if you want to just tell us just a little bit about yourself, how long you've been in Coquitlam, and then tell us about your perspective on assemblies as well.
Sure, thanks, Stephen. So yeah, I've been a city planner now for 16 years. The last 14 of those here in the city of Coquitlam. I've spent the first part of my career on the community planning side, doing long-range planning, neighborhood planning, community engagement. And the last kind of 2.5 years, I've been heading up the development team here in Coquitlam. So we're the folks who process all of the rezoning and development permit applications that take all of Jeff's projects, hopefully to fruition. So with that, certainly we recognize that both the developers and the brokers, they're our key partners in city building. And yeah, sometimes I have to be the bad guy, although I've certainly met some developers, probably none in this room, but that have been the bad guy that I'm trying to wrangle on the other side. But we create plans, and we need the developers and brokers as our partners to help achieve our vision for how we see a community evolving, to achieve those plan goals, and of course increase housing supply, which is the other key thing we're interested in. So in that, the city has multiple roles and multiple hats that we're wearing. So the first big one, of course, is we are the development regulator. So under the Local Government Act, we're tasked with regulating zoning and development permits and land uses. So, we're reviewing all those development applications to ensure that they're meeting the city's policies and regulations and council's expectations. We also want to work with our partners, the developers and the brokers, to achieve the goals of our plans as shown in neighborhood plans and the official community plan. We'll try to help a neighborhood evolve into something different, and we need our partner to do that with us. And then the last hat we're wearing is to protect the public interest. So there's times where we're trying to balance a number of competing priorities, and things like the highest and best use of land or maximizing the return for the broker or the developer might not be the city's top priority. We might be looking at how to minimize impacts to neighborhoods or to achieve community amenities or other things that are some of our goals. So, with that, as we prepare community plans for allowing a neighborhood to evolve from single family to multifamily uses, we're balancing, again, a number of those competing interests. So we're looking at all the good planning principles, the kind of stuff I learned in university around how to build a good city, but also what are the legislative requirements in the Local Government Act, the Community Charter, the other legislation we work under. What is the neighborhood context? Where is it located? Is it near a SkyTrain? Is it in an established neighborhood? Also looking at what are our regional growth commitments. We've got commitments that we have to meet under Metro Vancouver's regional growth strategy in terms of accommodating population growth. Again, I already talked about the public interest. Also some of the financial constraints, both in terms of the project economics, so what makes it viable for a developer to bring forward a project, but also the city's financial constraints in terms of, can we put in the servicing, the streets and parks, the community amenities, the water and sewer services and things like that that are necessary to allow a neighborhood to evolve.
Andrew, I'm just going to jump in for 1 second and say that we've had somebody say that if you could speak up just a little bit more in volume, that they're not quite hearing you as well.
Sure. Is it better if I hold the microphone closer?
That's awesome.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we talked about financial constraints, also the technical feasibility. So we're looking at, again, can the site be serviced? What is the topography like in a neighborhood? Is it, even technically feasible to do a development? What are the city's broad goals and objectives and priorities as articulated in the official community plan? So one of the key takeaways for that is not all property owners in a neighborhood are going to receive the same land use designation and therefore the same lift in value of their property. And we see that where we've got neighbors who might be across the street saying, well, they're selling for this much. How come I'm not getting that same price? And it's, well, you have a different land use designation. They're medium density in your townhouse, and we have other goals we're trying to achieve around land use transition and meeting certain housing forms and housing types that are necessary for the community as a whole. So as you're contemplating putting together an assembly, ensure that your development aspirations, both yours and the property sellers, are realistic, that they're grounded in what is shown in the official community plan or the neighborhood plan. And certainly talk to the city early to understand the requirements and what some of the opportunities and constraints of the site may be. So whether that's, what are the land use designations and anticipated zoning? Are there road dedications? Are there park and open space requirements? Are there any environmental constraints or topographic conditions that may impact the development yield? Is there spacing from other developments? We also don't want towers to get too close together. So you have to look at logical kind of assembly blocks that allow towers to be spaced out from each other. And then finally, a couple of people talked about orphan sites, but for us, that's key. We don't want to see the house from up with two towers on either side. So we like assemblies that follow logical patterns and allow for efficient site plans. So, I don't want a developer to bring me a lot assembly that looks like Tetris pieces, because that makes it really hard to have the efficient layout of a neighborhood. But it also makes it really challenging to do site planning. So most of the development site plans are driven more by the efficient layout of an underground parkade than actually what's happening above ground. And that's because cars have fixed dimensions in terms of the size of a parking stall and the size of a drive aisle that lead to logical sizes and shapes for assemblies. The other thing to talk about, certainly treat residents fairly and professionally. So planning is also a political process. And quite often, if residents are involved in assembly and they feel like they're not getting the price they want, or they're not being treated fairly, or they're concerned that they want to remain an orphan, or they're concerned that their neighbor is an orphan, they'll contact us or they'll contact mayor and council and try to bring the city into those real estate negotiations. And we don't want to be involved in that at all. We just want to be the land use regulator and let you guys deal with the real estate. But those residents are also potential voters. So my mayor and council sometimes want to get involved. And we want to avoid that where possible, because once the real estate deal becomes political, it also gets messy. And that just makes it more challenging for all of us. The other thing, and I know both Brandon and Jeff mentioned this, but I'll reinforce, leave sufficient time in your closing dates and your other dates for that due diligence period. I'm going to go even longer than Jeff and say up to 6 months for you to talk to the city and have time to put in formal inquiries and even allow the developer to potentially complete a pre-application process to ensure that they have comfort that their development concept is actually feasible on that site. And with that, just wanted to touch on, the city has limited ability to review concepts outside of a formal pre-app process. You can't just flash drawings at us across the counter and expect us to, or we have limited ability to say, yes, that's good, or yes, that's supportable, or yes, it's likely that council would approve that development. We take in pre-applications and we spend anywhere from 3 to 6 months referring those out to other departments and studying them to make sure they meet the various regulations and expectations. Last thing I wanted to just touch on was after properties have been assembled, ensure they're kept clean and maintained, because you have to be a good neighbor to all the other residents in the neighborhood who are remaining in their homes. And that'll be key for my council. If they see sites that are dirty or vandalized or there's garbage on site, I've had 2 developments recently get kicked back to staff where council denied them because the sites were unkempt or dirty or unmaintained. So ensure that you don't want the neighborhood that's having redevelopment happen in there get cranky that they're now living across the street from a construction site, or there's a bunch of vacant homes that cause issues of dumping or vandalism. So ensure sites are well maintained is my last thought. So thanks.
So you're saying that people need to continue to live in the house, and that's for the benefit of the neighborhood, and that's what the city is looking for.
Yes, yeah, because if the neighborhood turns against redevelopment and comes out and protests at the public hearing and we stop redevelopment, then that dries up the whole system. Right now, we've got neighborhoods that are generally appreciative. They support the neighborhood plan that calls for change in their neighborhood, but change is disruptive. So as much as we can minimize those disruptions is key.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate that, Andrew. Another question I have for you is, do cities, I guess you can only speak to Coquitlam, but do cities, do they look at pre-zoning land? Are they following OCPs? What about when developers want to change densities? Is that something that you can talk to, or is that just like so open-ended that it's impossible to talk to? But like the desires that people have, like, because when a realtor is approaching somebody and saying that this is a pretend, if we can get your neighbors together and do this, we can actually get you a lift on the value of your house based on whatever density is either in the OCP, or that they can go to the city and lobby to get a higher bonus density or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, every municipality is different and has a slightly different planning system. In Coquitlam, we've been fairly proactive at going out and keeping our neighborhood plans fairly modern and up to date. So, we've chatted before, I know Brandon and Jeff have done some work in the Oakdale neighborhood. So we went through a 2-year planning process with the residents to change the land use designations from single family to a mix of high density, medium density, and townhouse, depending on the location. So we've given certainty to the neighborhood and council and everyone what the future of that neighborhood looks like. So we typically don't rezone, but we do kind of signal in our official community plan what that direction looks like. We've done some limited pre-zoning for smaller scale stuff in the duplex, triplex, fourplex kind of level. But we're also open to, if you have a pocket or an assembly that's not yet planned, you can come and have a conversation with us about submitting an amendment to the official community plan. I mean, that's a longer, more onerous process that has no certainty whatsoever, but we're open to having that conversation and chatting with you.
What is talking about the rezoning process? What time frame does that look like?
Yeah, so in Coquitlam, we say that's probably about a year on average, and we process the rezoning and development permit concurrently at the same time. So not all municipalities will do that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say, first off, I want to say thank you to all three of our panelists. This is great. I want to make sure to open up to our participants here. That you have the opportunity to ask questions, and we have some good questions that have come in. We really appreciate that, and there is an opportunity to put those in the chat section, is where we can read them. And now, one of the questions that I had, and this is probably for Brandon, is when you have so we're going to continue. We're going to keep on continuing for another 30 minutes, just so that people know we're not cutting things off. But I just want to thank each of the panelists for the presentation so far. And now we're going to be opening it up to a little bit more of a broader discussion. Hopefully, we can get something going between our panelists as well. So the question, this one is for Brandon, is really about representation. When you're working with an assembly and you have people, with regards to the representation that we need to offer people now, do you find that there is ever any conflict when you're giving advice to somebody and then their neighbor, and you're trying to put multiple people together? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so that's pretty much the biggest challenge, right? Is that making sure that everything's above board, all the disclosures and everything that need to be met, confidentiality, all that's met. Basically, our approach is transparency. So just getting owners to acknowledge that all information about any offers and the assembly can be shared amongst the group, and getting that up front. As long as they acknowledge that up front, everything's above board. We have, specific marketing agreements done so that they acknowledge that the information is going to be shared, and it kind of helps to make sure all the rules and guidelines are followed as best you can.
That's great. And Andrew, in terms of working with OCPs and NCPs, we have somebody that's wanting to look at a particular zoning, RM3, and about density bonus changes coming to that. Can you address that at all? Is this something coming? Is this in the news right now?
It is, yeah. And in fact, I'll be
Good
chatting
question.
with the Urban Development Institute next Thursday during our liaison committee meeting. Yeah, so right now the city is reviewing our density bonus and CAC program. In that, we're looking at increasing our CAC rate and making some tweaks to the density bonus program for high-rise development. But we're also looking at introducing a new density bonus for the 6-story wood frame, which is the RM3 zone, that currently doesn't exist. So it currently has a base density of 1.5 FAR, and then there's a free bonus up to 2.
I'm just going to ask you if you wanted to grab
the
mic.
Sorry. Yeah, so in the RM3 zone, which is our 6-story zone, it currently has a free base of 1.85 FAR, and then also has a free bonus up to 2.4. And as part of that, we're looking at introducing a new density bonus program for that bonus. So that's gone to committee. We're in the process of consulting now with stakeholders and the development industry. And then the intent would be to take those bylaw amendments forward for first reading, probably middle of this year or this fall, dependent on the consultation feedback.
Okay. This is another question for Brandon. It has to do with somebody that's just getting into assembly and just learning the ropes. Is there anything that you can tell them in terms of education or other ways that they can get themselves familiar with it? Should they be getting a mentor? How should they be approaching if it's a new realtor that's just wanting to start off and get into assembly because they know that there's big money to be made in assembly, and what they should be going, or which direction they should be going?
Yeah, my recommendation is be on a good team. With different assemblies, there's so many different dynamics. And if you're on a team that complements each other, and maybe if you're new, has that experience of how to work through, I mean, basically you're just trying to work through everyone's obstacles and objections to get the whole assembly together. So if you're on a team that's well-versed in that, and they can share, their experience with you, and then you complement each other. A lot of times too, language barriers. So if you're on a team that has multiple language, native and fluent in different languages also can really help. So yeah, I would definitely recommend for land assembly, being on a team is really helpful.
So here's a question for Jeff, and it's a perspective question. It's really that some of the owners think that developers have huge profit margins, and it's all they're doing is making loads and loads of money because the land values have been going up, and they think that they're taking advantage of the poor homeowner who's only been there for 20 years and is losing his home. Do you want to address in terms of how the costs are related to what a developer is going through? And I mean, we're not asking for your profit margin that you're putting on in your company, but in terms of the costs, be they construction, time, financing, those kinds of things.
Sure. Yeah. I understand the question and the concern coming from any seller. I think the easiest way to address it is there is a market price for the land that developers will pay, and often there are comparables out there to help educate them on what developers are able to pay to redevelop the land. Ultimately,
I'm just going to jump in on that one right there for you, because there's somebody else that's also asking something about values of lands.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing land valuations, is it strictly market comparables, or is it the redevelopment potential? Is it like based on the density? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I think the market comps is the simplest way to try and value the land. Just look at what the most recent what the last transaction was, but ultimately the market can move quickly, and there are there's a full development pro forma that will determine what the land residual is. What is the land worth? That's the last input from a development perspective. Once you put in your prospective revenue, all of your costs, and it basically renders a land value that you can afford to pay for a single family lot, or for an assembly, or for any potential development site. So as construction costs rise, that will challenge your land value. As city fees increase, that will challenge your land value. These things are always being offset by revenue that keeps going up, right? You always hear of a new condo project launching at a higher value, so my house is worth more. But at the same time, costs are also going up and fees are also going up. So those things tend to balance out, and ultimately you're left with what the land is worth. What can you pay for the land? And I think Brandon can attest to how competitive it is. When he does put an assembly together, he'll get sometimes multiple offers within a very tight band in terms of what the developer can pay. So it's driven by the market, and it is moving. So in terms of how a realtor or broker could value from a development perspective, I don't know, Brandon, you have experience with your own pro forma, kind of valuing what you think it's worth, calling a developer and just getting their perspective, getting some land comps if you can find other comps in the neighborhood, speaking to other realtors. This is all part of the understanding that needs to get built up to help market and effectively sell an assembly.
Thank you. Here's another one for Andrew. This is going to be.
And then I'll just expand on that for a sec. Yeah, just going back to what Jeff was saying, if you don't know how to do a pro forma, get cozy with some developers, and then you can ask them to help you with the evaluation too. Take them out for lunch, maybe wine and dine a couple developers that are in tune with that area, and then they can help you with that pro forma and run some numbers as well. And they don't want to see a bunch of overpriced sites in the market either. So
For a land appraiser like Ryan or someone.
Right. And what about, like, here's a little bit of a political one almost, is CACs.
Yep.
You've got Metro Vancouver, you've got city, you've got sewer. Can you address like the cost charges? And because those things, they get passed on to the developer, which passes it on to the individual homeowners. Everybody's talking about affordability and the cost of housing. Can you address any of that?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a number of different fees and charges that we kind of levy on new development to ensure that it's covering the cost of infrastructure and amenities for those projects. So the first one, development cost charges, or if you're in Vancouver, they're development cost levies. Those are covered under the Local Government Act of legislation. And in most places, we're levying those to pay for parkland acquisition, parkland improvement, water, sanitary, and storm drainage, as well as transportation. And we use those to fund our capital plans to ensure that infrastructure is provided to service new growth. So that's kind of the main one. And then both TransLink and Metro Vancouver also have their own DCCs that they levy as well to pay for their infrastructure needs. The other two that we have on top of that is both CACs and density bonusing. Unfortunately, every municipality in the province does their own CACs and density bonusing and often calls them different things. So there's not really easy comparisons between municipalities. So at least in Coquitlam, our CACs are not negotiated and they're not based on the land lift model. They're a fixed price per square foot. That's currently $3 a square foot, which is relatively low, although as I mentioned in that review we're undertaking, it's proposed to double to $6 a square foot. And we use that to pay for community amenities that we are not legally allowed to use development cost charges to fund, like spray parks, libraries, community centers, fire halls, those sorts of things. And then density bonus is where we set a base density. So in Coquitlam, most of our base densities are 2.5 FAR, and then a developer who's building a high rise can bonus up to 5 or 6, but they pay a density bonus to achieve those higher densities. And we, again, don't negotiate that based on a pro forma analysis or a land lift model. In Coquitlam, we've got a set formula in the zoning bylaw that says, based on whatever the land price is per square foot. So for high density stuff, say near Burquitlam Station, I think that's running somewhere in the 170 to 180 a foot range right now. Our expectation is for that bonus density, 50% of that would come back to the city. Again, and we use that for community amenities. So as I said, every city does it differently. Some cities will want to open up your pro forma and extract as much as they can. We in Coquitlam try to have a slightly more transparent and predictable process that the developers can put those charges into their residual land value analysis and know what they're going to pay for land. So as Jeff mentioned, when you're deciding what the market price is for development land, you put in all your hard costs, your soft costs, your materials, construction, labor, profit, all your city fees and charges, and then you have a residual land value at the end that is the maximum price that developer can pay for land. So unlike a normal residential real estate, it's not based on comparables with how nice is the house next door. It's all based on what does it cost to build the project.
Right. So here's another question that might be for Brandon. Is somebody's asking about somebody working with a small developer, and they're saying, I can't find land assembly there, it's not on the MLS. Is everything done exclusive? So if somebody is working with a new developer or a small developer that's looking for properties, where can they find properties that have been assembled and are getting taken to market?
Yeah, pretty much everything's, most of the assemblies, like all the ones we do are pretty much all exclusive. I mean, we post everything online, so it's just on our website, but apartmentblocks.ca. But yeah, that's pretty much, you just got to know who the land assembly teams are and check their websites, because they're pretty much doing the same thing, putting it exclusively.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well. It's to my point earlier, whereby typically the broker assembling the properties are looking for a good buyer and trying to match make a little bit in terms of who's qualified. Obviously it goes out to the market, but if there's an opportunity to bring someone in, it can help smooth the process for both sides.
And in terms of properties that do come to market, do you guys, are you competing against each other? How often do you find that you're outbidding each other on sites? What is the, do you just sit down together and say, we're going to pick this and somebody else is going to pick that? Or is it just that you are the first one, or that you have just those relationships that work and you keep on going to the same brokers that are assembling? How about that?
Yeah, I can take it quickly. I mean, we've been in multiple situations where you're competing for an assembly. It's at the early stages, certainly. Once the owners have decided to work with a specific group, you're effectively on the outside looking in while they're negotiating their contracts. So there is this period where it's kind of open to the market, but then once it's moving forward and they've selected the group they want to work with, it really goes quiet, and effectively you're not getting the same responses because you didn't have the highest offer. Is effectively how that goes.
Right. And before, I forget who it was that mentioned it, orphan properties. Do you guys, does the city want to prevent orphan properties from happening? And if somebody is like yourself, Brandon, if you're working on a project and there's just somebody that's just absolutely just, I want double what the market value is, and I'm just not going to do anything otherwise, does that shut down the entire project? Or do you get to hive off and do 4/5 of a project? And how does that work?
Yeah, well, that's kind of one of the bane of assemblers is that policy. We really wish we could leave that one house in between the up house. But yeah, the orphanage policy is usually like 2 or 3 lots. So it matters where they are in the assembly, obviously. Try and pivot around them. If you absolutely have to have them because they're, the city wants that one property for a road or something like that, and it just doesn't make sense, or they're in the middle. A lot of times it helps to have the neighbors go over and talk to them, try and get them on board. Even actually, Coquitlam's actually been great. In the past, they've even spoken with neighbors as well. So if there's been a neighbor that said, hey, we want to sell, but they're just out to lunch on pricing, and for some reason they're not listening to us, we've had planners actually reach out to them and be like, okay, we know you want to sell, this is the situation, and the rest of the residents are on board. So is there something we can, is there more information we can provide to help you feel comfortable with this? So there's definitely some different avenues, but yeah.
I just expand on it from a Vancouver context. The secured rental policy was recently passed, which unlocks a bunch of single family homes along arterials in Vancouver for 5-story rental, 5-story plus. And so this is common areas for assembly. And there's, as part of that new policy, there's a requirement to leave 99 feet of frontage. So you used to be able to go to the neighbor, and if one neighbor wanted to stay, one neighbor wanted to sell, there was some flexibility. Now it's really written in stone, so to speak. The policy is 99 feet of frontage. You cannot leave less. And yeah, it makes it a little bit more difficult, but also it provides clarity. You're not going to run into challenges down the road once you're in an application process. So
great. One thing I just want to say as a housekeeping matter is that we're going to have Andrew, Brandon, and Jeff's contact information, and that'll be available to all the people that have joined, so that if you do have a question for one of them, or if you have a project or something exciting that you want to bring to them, that you've already assembled a land package that you're all ready to take it to Strand and get it straight out to the market, so that Andrew can approve it and get it into being built right away, that we can definitely do that. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that that we are going to have the contact information for our panelists available afterwards. And in terms of other areas, is somebody's going back to LOIs and saying that they want to expand on LOIs. How often are LOIs used? Do you I know that you guys mentioned that you use the standard MLS form for dealing with houses. A lot of the time, are LOIs used less now?
It's rare. Yeah. I regret bringing it up almost, because I don't recommend it. There is an avenue there to try and just, again, speed up the negotiation early on, high level. But an MLS contract does not take a long time to fill out either. And it can often end up speeding up the process. You're always going to go back and forth a couple times anyways. So if the group's prepared, then I'd recommend going that way. I guess the only instance an LOI is valuable is if you do have a large group that's banded together and kind of agreed to share all their information. Then you can and you think there's multiple offers, rather than get a bunch of MLS contracts for, say, an 8-lot assembly. If you have 3 people interested, you can say, okay, just give us your number on an LOI, and then we know who to negotiate with when we go to the MLS contracts. So that's it. It's really in a competitive process where you have a really strong group of sellers that it is applicable. Otherwise, MLS contracts.
So here's another question for you is, let's say one of our audience members has successfully achieved the impossible of assembling a project right now. And they've come here because they have it ready. It's packaged up. Where do they go? It's their first time doing it. Should they just go to UDI and just come down the list there and find out who all the developers are? Or if they're going to be taking it to market, how do they take it to market?
Yeah, so basically you got to create a database of developers, right? As big as you can. One way to do that, a simple way just to get started, is just Google Buzz Homes, look at all the developments that are going on, and just, I mean, developers, they want to be found, right? Jeff wants to see your sites. He's not trying to hide. So if you just create a database like that and just track, you just look at, okay, who's building what right now? That's a good place to get started.
So buzzhomes.com, or just Google it?
Just basically Google all the developers that are building right now is a good way to get started on, and then find their contact info through their websites.
And how much are I'm going to say realtor / developers that are just somebody that's been a realtor that is wanting to step into the development field, where are they going to be finding costs if they're going to be looking at the pro forma costs and creating a model for themselves?
So one really good one, there's 2 companies that have public costs for just very basic hard costs. Altus puts one out, and so does Butterfield Development Consultants. So if you just go to Butterfield Development Consultants, they actually have this online form that you just kind of say, okay, I'm building townhomes with underground parking in Coquitlam. What are my costs, hard costs, going to be? And it'll spit out a number for you. So that's a really good way. And then your soft costs, just kind of times it. A rule of thumb, and maybe Jeff can comment on this, I think is about 30% of your hards, just a quick rule of thumb. And then you have financing on top. And then that could really give you just a really simple sort of idea of pro formas.
I know that, guys, I know that we've gone a little bit over. I think we were talking about 11:15 here, and I can see that we're 11:25. Can you guys stay for 5 more minutes? Does that work for your schedule? because we've got great questions coming in. So if you can stay for 5 more minutes, that would be great.
Yeah.
So another one that's come in is with regards to minimum documentation that is needed for pre-approvals. What is the pre-approval process when, say, going through Coquitlam? What does somebody need to assemble and bring together? Is it just merely the contracts that they have, or what's that look like?
Yeah, so typically once someone has an assembly, you know, we do get occasional brokers that are asking sort of what can happen on the site. So they'll look on our online mapping system called To the Map and see what is the land use designation, the zoning, what's in the servicing, all the mapping information is there. They can also contact our front counter to get information on, you know, what's allowed, what might the rezoning look like, and timelines and costs. After that, typically a developer is going to want to submit a pre-application. So this is sort of a, the amount of information they need to submit is stripped down. Usually we're looking at site plans and building renderings and massing. You know, we want to figure out site access, any road dedications, and a bit of a program. So, you know, how much square footage, how many units, how much commercial space, that kind of stuff. And then we'll discuss with them over a couple of months and give them some feedback on that development. And then on our application form, there's a long list of other documents you need to submit at different stages in the process in terms of different drawings, whether that's stormwater management plan, a arborist report, your servicing concepts for utilities, your full architectural drawings and things like that will come in at different stages in the process.
I'm going to ask the whole panel a question. What is, it's a two-part question, is what is something that you look for as the key to success of putting together an assembly that you know you can take to market in terms of getting it successfully approved by the city? What's I'll start with Brandon and then go to Jeff and then to Andrew. What's the one key to success in your field as the realtor that's putting it together? And then I'll come to Jeff next and then to Andrew so far as the approval process for you. Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, basically pre-assemble as much as you can, talk to the city so you know any challenges or obstacles that are going to happen later on down the road, and then just build the biggest network of developers you can by just figuring out who's building right now and then tracking them down and getting their contact info and getting the site out to everybody.
And the person that you're going to be contacting at that developer is the CEO, the CFO, like the development manager? Who's it going to be? Like
Jeff, right? They have a lot of internal land acquisitions.
Yeah.
Guys, usually
there's usually a land acquisitions rep, ideally, or really anyone. I mean, it'll funnel through to the right person if you just get a contact in there.
Okay. And Jeff,
I'll follow up with my key to assembly. It's the pre-assembly. It's just having the owners alignment of the owners.
Okay. And
yeah,
Andrew, what's
for
the key?
me for easy approvals? Yeah, you know, clean square sites without any orphans and don't look like a Tetris piece or a checkerboard. And you know, the concept should meet all of the expectations and policies in the neighborhood plan and the zoning bylaw, and don't expect a bunch of variances which we can't guarantee up front, and don't debate all the requirements. You know, why do I have to give road dedication? Why do I have to build a storm system? Why do I have to plant trees? Because the bylaw said so, because council passed a rule saying that they want this to happen. So
it's stick within the boundaries that has already been pre-drawn and has been there for years.
yes.
And that this may be their first time, but it's not your first time.
Yeah, and the more you want to debate those requirements, the longer your process is going to take, and your carrying costs per month can be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you're just wasting your own money by dragging out the process.
Okay.
Or you're wasting Jeff's money. I guess that's
someone's.
So one of the things that was brought up before was with regards to the costs, the websites that was Butterfield consultants was one. If you go there, if you look it up, that's going to give you the information as to costs. The other one is Altus Insight, is another excellent place to get market information. And what I want to do is I want to say we're at 11:30. I want to thank everybody that has been here and for all the excellent input. The questions have been great. Thank you to all the people that have been participating with all the questions. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to all of your questions. We tried to get to as many of them as possible. I want to thank Tammy Dunn and Cheryl Funston. If you guys want to come back on and say hello, so we can see you. And they're the people that have been in the back end keeping this thing working. And I also want to thank our panelists, Brendan Harding, Jeff Matthews, and Andrew Merrill. I think the information that you provided us has been very, very insightful. It's good for me and my business as well. So on behalf of everybody that has been here, I want to thank you. We are going to have your contact information that we'll be able to provide that to all the people that have been here today. Also, this event has been recorded, so you can go back and review something if there was something that you wanted to get more information about, or you wanted to look at it again. So it is going to be there. And the last thing I wanted to say is that there are a couple events that I want to make sure people know about. One is that CCIM is going to be having a course. This is if you want to learn more about the math behind putting together deals and what's involved in financing. CCIM is offering a course of the CI 101. This is the foundation course on which everything else is built. This is going to be on June 7th to 10th at UBC Robson Square. I highly recommend that. It's an excellent course. CCIM is, you can work towards a designation there. Also on May 28th, there's going to be a class called Property Development, What Realtors Need to Know. So that's another excellent class that you should be signing up for. June 2nd, there is going to be a TransLink update about the SFU gondola. And then June 14th, there is a cap rates and operating income class, another excellent commercial class that you should be taking. So the education that you're going to be able to get there is going to really put you in the right place so that when you're speaking with developers or when you're speaking with the city, that you're educated and you know what you're going to be doing. So again, we want to thank you. And I want to thank Cheryl and Tammy. Is there anything that I've missed that you guys want to highlight before we say goodbye to everybody?
You covered it. Thanks so much.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. It was really nice meeting you virtually, and thanks for your time. And if we do this again, we'll be good to see you all.
Great.
Thanks all.
Okay.
Thanks everybody.